Okay, and now we start. Welcome everybody to the lecture, and please try to be a bit quiet. My voice is still a bit sore. So we had to skip one week, and but we had a little bit of leeway. So I'm pretty sure that we will be able to manage with the program. So far, in the first meeting, we have talked about different models of language, right? And I've guided you through a tour in which we had a look at several models that were and still are important, but were important and came up in the 20th century. First, language as structure, language as a system, and then language as an ideal speaker-listener's linguistic competence, and from then to language as communication and discourse. And why is it important to know about these models? Why is it important to distinguish these models? Because depending on which model you use in order to look at language, you will ask different questions, you will see different things, you will understand different things about language. Okay? So today, we will talk about words and their meanings, and this is in line with what you actually started with, phonetics and phonology, syntax and semantics. So today it's what you could call lexicology, the study of words. There's a little bit of overlap with some of the things Stefan Hofstetter talked about, but from a slightly different perspective. So again, it will help you, hopefully, better appreciate the importance and value of having different models and being aware of the models you use. So words and their meaning. These are the four topics I will talk about. How many words? That's the first question we will deal with. Then a little bit about word formation. This should be fairly familiar. Morphology, and then word meaning. Probably a few things you are not familiar with yet. How many words? We talk about words. We use the word in everyday communication, and usually we are not aware of the fact that this seemingly innocent word tends to be used with quite different meanings. For instance, if you take the first example, the parents of the bride were waiting. How many words? If you wanted to count words, or if you were given the task to count the words in this sentence, how many words would you say do we have in the sentence? Seven. The parents of the bride were waiting. 7 words. How many words? Is there another possibility? Yes. 3. Namely? Okay, is there another possibility?
6 if you count the article
Yes, 6. So if it depends on whether you count the article, the definite article, 2 times or only once. It's 1 word, right? So you could argue there are 6 words in this sentence. But now, of course, we use a slightly different meaning of the word. And there's a terminological distinction which is quite useful in this connection, and that is the distinction between type and token. Token is each individual occurrence of a word, and type Well, that is the occurrence of each word as a type. Okay? And as a type, the and the only count once. Okay? So if you count tokens, you have 7 words. If you count word types, you have 6. What makes it even more complex is the concept of word forms. Look at sing and sings and singing and sang and sung. All these are different word forms, or more precisely, verb forms of the same verb. And you actually find this verb only once in a dictionary. You can't directly look up sang, sung, singing, only if they form the basis for yet another derived word. Okay? So where did you buy your hats? How many words? If we take into account word forms, if we take into account word forms, yes, namely did, by would count as one word form, right? John is singing a song he sang last year, and we are happy. So singing and he sang. 2 different verb forms of the same verb. I said you only find it once in a dictionary. But now the interesting question is, how do you find it? So when you look up verbs, what do you look up? Not in English. Which verb form do you need to know in order to be able to look up a verb in a German or English dictionary? Infinitive, yeah. What about Latin? Which verb form do you need to know? Yes, indicative active, right? So, and here we have another very important distinction. And now we move from the level of words we use in everyday communication to linguistic terminology. And that is the term lexeme. Lexemes are words just from the perspective of meaning. It's an abstraction from word forms. A lexeme actually occurs with different or in different word forms. If you take, for instance, singing and sang, we have different word forms of the same verb to sing. Okay? And what is interesting here is that we have usually one form which is used as the so-called citation form. So in the case of verbs, we have the infinitive as a citation form. And in the case of nouns, it's the nominative singular, and so forth. Okay? And what you look up in a dictionary are actually lexemes. You look up a lexeme and you are interested in its meaning. You are interested in the various word forms in which it appears, usage, and things like that. What makes it a little bit more complicated is that we have words like take off and look for. And, well, even things like kick the bucket, hit the sack. What are these? John Lyons proposes to call them phrasal lexemes. That is, lexemes which consists of several sort of word parts. Yeah? And here we have phrasal verbs, take off, look for, or we have idioms like kick the bucket. So how many words again? The parents of the bride were waiting while the groom was taking off. How many words? It depends, right? It depends on whether you want to count tokens or types. It depends on whether you want to lump word forms together and say, okay, I only want to count lexemes. And it depends on how you want to deal with these things. As phrasal lexemes, it would only take and off would only count once. Now you might think it's not important to make these decisions. Of course, it is very important. Just think of the simple instruction a teacher might give. Two possibilities. First instruction, write an essay of 1,000 words. Well, what do you count? An essay of 1,000 words. What do you count? Every single word, that is, every lexeme? No. Type? No. Token? Yes. Every token. Now the second instruction. Write an essay of 1,000 words, but try to make it lively. Use as many different words as possible. What would you count? What would you count? Types? What about singing, sang, sung? Would you count them separately? I mean, with types you are heading in the right direction, but it's not enough. You would count lexemes, right? So you probably couldn't convince your teacher by saying, well, I've used as many different words as possible. See, here I have sing, sings, sang, singing. No. This would count as one word in this instruction. So what the teacher actually meant, and what is, by the way, very easy for you to understand in an intuitive way, is that he meant lexemes, right? So, how many words? Now about word formation, how words are actually built. Here we have a few examples which are taken from George Yule's book, The Study of Language. I'm a sump at a local radio station. Are sumps well paid? Oh, it's not bad, but I can't imagine sumping for the rest of my life. The sumpist role in broadcasting, sumpism as a vocation. Wow. The interesting thing about these examples is, well, first of all, you certainly don't know what a sump is, or what sumping refers to. But if I told you what to sump means, then you would have all the other meanings available as well. And why? Because you know the rules of English word formation. You have intuitive knowledge of these rules. And these rules allow you, based on a certain word, to build another one, to create another one. Word formation in this sense is the dynamic part of our mental lexicon. And now let's have a closer look at some of the key processes. We have coinage already, of course. All this is following George Yule. We have coinage, that is the creation of a new word, like sump, aspirin, nylon, Kleenex, Xerox. We have borrowing. That is when we take words from another language and incorporate them in our mental lexicon. We might adapt them to a certain extent, certainly on the level of how we pronounce these new words, that is on the level of phonetics, but also on the level of morphology. So here we have alcohol, boss, croissant, piano, pretzel. So a selection of borrowings from different languages. Loan translation. This is where you take a compound word from another language and you use it as a model for building a new word in your new compound in your own language. So skyscraper was the model for Wolkenkratzer. Wolkenkratzer and skyscraper is not entirely the same, right? Skyscraper, Wolkenkratzer. Himmelskratzer would be a more direct translation. Gratte-ciel, that's in French. That's similar to skyscraper. Übermensch actually was the model for Superman. Lehnwort for loan word. Hot dog, perros calientes. Okay, and here we have another very, very productive process, and that is compounding. That is, you take two words and put them together to form a new one. Bookcase, fingerprint, wallpaper, textbook, waterbed, magnifying glasses, and things like these. What is interesting about compounds is that if you know the meanings of each word out of which the compound has been created, you have a fairly good chance of inferring the meaning of the new compound. Okay? What is wallpaper? It's paper you cover the walls with. What's a waterbed? Well, it's a bed which is somehow based on water. But this shows already that you need to know a little more about how things work in our world, what makes sense in our world. Think of what I said earlier about understanding discourse, and that we need world knowledge, contextual knowledge. This becomes apparent if you compare horseshoes and alligator shoes. What are horseshoes? Shoes for horses. And what are alligator shoes? Yeah, the poor alligator. Yeah? It's not shoes for alligators, but shoes made of the skin of the alligator. Of course, it would be possible to create a scenario in which alligator shoes would be shoes for alligators and horseshoes would be shoes made of, well, not everybody here would like this. So, on the one hand, you have the linguistic signal and the words that form the compound and their meanings help you guess the meaning of the new compound, but usually not 100%. So you need additional information. But it helps you tremendously, of course, with, as learners of a language, to build up your mental lexicon. Here are other word formation processes. Blending is when we have two words and we blend them together and we cut off certain parts, like smoke and fog, which becomes smog, or brunch, which is created from breakfast and lunch. Okay? Clippings, in this case, you just drop part of a more complex word. Gasoline becomes gas. Fanatic becomes fan. Omnibus becomes bus. Okay? Influenza becomes flu. And we have acronyms where you take the first letter and you create a new word. Like in laser, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, or radar, scuba, snafu, or things like that. Conversion is an interesting case. This refers to the creation of new words without any morphological change. So you have a noun, and from a noun you create a verb. So you have paper, and you have he's papering the bedroom walls. Paper to paper as a verb. Vacation to vacation. That is, to make a vacation. Or from a verb to a noun. That is, to guess and a guess. Must and a must. This is a must for us. We need to do it. Okay? And you can do it with all the other parts of speech. Preposition to a verb. They upped the prices. We downed a few beers. Derivation is a type of word formation which consists of a part which could stand alone, like in the case of unhappy, this would be happy, and a part which cannot stand alone, unhappy, and un has the meaning of not. So if you know what happy means, you know what unhappy means. If you know what to represent means, and you know what this little prefix mis does, you know what misrepresent means. Joy, full. Careless, boyish, sadness, disrespectful. Back formation is interesting because it looks like derivation, but it's just the opposite. So television, in a way, looks as if it had been created from to televise, but that is not the case. Television was first, and then televise, the verb, was created. The same with editor and edit, donation and donate. This is something you cannot work out just with your intuition. As a speaker of the language, you need to look into the history of the language. Okay, now these processes can be used together to snowball. Which processes are involved in to snowball?
Create a snowball and throw it.
No, I don't mean which physical processes. I mean word formation processes. Which word formation processes are involved in to snowball? To snowball is a verb, right? Conversion from snowball as a noun to snowball as a verb. And what about snowball as a noun? No, snowball is not blending. In blending, you always delete part of the, like in, brunch from breakfast and lunch. But what about, yes, it's compounding, right? So you have compounding and conversion. What you have in to lays? To lays. Any idea what is involved here?
I know what involved is, but...
Pardon?
I know what involved is, but I don't know.
Yeah. So what is involved? To lays is obviously a verb, right? Back formation from? From laser. Okay, and what is laser? Well, derived in which way? It's an acronym. Yeah, we had it before. So you have an acronym combined with back formation. And in Delhi, what is involved in Delhi? Delhi corner? What's involved in Delhi? Can you expand it to a full form? Delhi? No. Well, delicious is somewhere hidden in this, but no. No. What is a Delhi corner? What do you buy there? What do you get there? Sandwiches and things like this. What is Delhi? Delicatessen. Delhi. So what is delicatessen to Delhi? What kind of process is this? Huh? What? Clipping, yes, clipping. And delicatessen? See? So you have clipping and borrowing. Delicatessen had been borrowed from German. Okay. So, and now a few terms which are relevant and which you had before. So this should be easy. For a morphological analysis, we need to distinguish between the following terms. A morpheme. What is a morpheme? What's a simple definition? Is a minimal unit that has or carries meaning. Okay? To be distinguished from a phoneme, which is a minimal unit that distinguishes meaning. So in the case of reopened, we have three morphemes. We have the morpheme re. We have the morpheme open, and we have the morpheme ed. And they all have different semantic functions, different meanings. Okay? And we know these meanings. There is a difference between these three morphemes, and that is the difference between free and bound. Open, this is a morpheme which can stand alone. Re cannot, and ed cannot either. Okay, they are bound morphemes. free morphemes and bound morphemes. That's an important distinction. And if you look at the free morphemes, it is important to distinguish between two types, namely lexical and functional. So boy and go and sincere would be free lexical lexemes, whereas and but and because are functional or grammatical, some linguists say. Grammatical morphemes, free morphemes. And we have a similar distinction for the bound morphemes. On the one hand, we have derivational bound morphemes. They are lexical. They have a lexical function. They help us create a new word. That is the ER, teacher, or the ness in goodness, or full in colorful, or able in learnable. And we have so-called inflectional morphemes, which are grammatical. Inflectional morphemes like past ed, or plural s, or progressive ing, and these things. Okay? The derivational bound morphemes, they help us create new words, and the inflectional morphemes, they help us place words within sentences in specific slots, syntactic slots. Well, and from a purely distributional perspective, we have affixes, that is prefix and suffix and stem. And we have this interesting distinction between morphs and allomorphs. You are familiar with this distinction, or similar distinction, from phonology. For instance, in the case of plural in English, we have a plural morpheme, but this plural morpheme is realized in different forms. House, houses. Fish, fishes. Or zero. And here you have to distinguish between the written version, so orthography, the written version, and the spoken version. Okay. Okay. There are, of course, problems, limitations for morphological analysis. And so we have regular forms like in cat and cats compared to men. In our morphological analysis, we would look at men as consisting of man plus a plural morpheme, and this plural morpheme is realized in a certain way. So here in this sort of compounded and condensed form men. In other cases, it is realized as a plural s. Or we have talked and went. So we have talk plus past, and past is realized as ed, which is the regular form. And in the case of went, we have go and past, and go plus past is realized as went. And you need to learn this as an irregular form. We have gooseberry versus cranberry. Gooseberry is fairly transparent. Cranberry is not. It is transparent if you go back in time and look at where it comes from, namely Low German Kronbeere, Kranenbeere, yeah? Cranberry. We have institutional versus legal, and here we have earlier influences from Latin, which are no longer transparent at the present state of our linguistic competence and linguistic intuition. Okay. That much for the formation of words. You find more on all this in our introductory books, in particular George Yule's Study of Language. And now we move on to a new chapter. And I would like to remind you again of what we talked about earlier. What is the first step in successful learning? Of course, you all know, asking questions, asking questions. And this is a question which is not at all trivial. And we want to deal with this one now. What is the meaning of a word? What is the meaning of a word? How would you characterize the meaning of a word? What's the meaning of a word? Any idea? We deal with words all the time and their meanings. We know so many words and their meanings, have them as part of our mental lexicon. Now, what about this simple question? What is the meaning of a word? Well, you are being told what the meaning of a word is, yes, but this doesn't help us with our question. You are right, but this doesn't help us with our question, yes. It depends on the context. Again, you are kind of moving around the actual question, right? What is the meaning of a word? The meaning of the word is what we understand when we hear a word. Yes. Later you will see that matters are more complex, indeed.
And maybe also what the word represents to us?
What it represents to us, okay. What it represents to us. Yes. What's the meaning of table? You all know the meaning of table. So what's the meaning of table? Oh, just a translation. So would it be necessary to know another language and to be able to translate in order to know the meaning of table? No. It's indeed a problem, and it is a problem because our ways of talking lead us astray. We talk about the meaning of words as if the meaning of a word were a something. Something we could grasp, something we could point at. What is the meaning of table? The way I phrase this question, and in a way it's a very natural way, yeah, for asking this question. But this points us to assume the meaning of table is a something. Or I say, well, I don't know the meaning of table. I have lost it. Where can I find it? Can you give me the meaning for table? All the time we are talking as if meaning were a something. Ludwig Wittgenstein, famous language philosopher, noticed this problem. And he said, well, our ways of talking about meaning and power and other words, they make us assume as if meaning were a something. And when we try to grasp it or point at it, there isn't anything we can point at, and it creates something like a mental cramp in our mind. And what is the solution? Wittgenstein offers as a solution to look at what people do when they explain the meaning of a word, say to a foreigner. Now, what do we do when we explain the meaning of a word to a foreigner? What do we do? We use body language. So in the case of table, what would I do? Okay, I could, yeah, like this, okay. What else could I do?
Take synonyms.
I could use a synonym, namely.
Care table is a pretty bad example.
No, desk, kind of. Yeah.
Just pointing to it.
Yeah, you could point, right? You point. That's a table. Now, if you use pointing, what would you do? Would you point to the same table each time? That's a table, that's a table, that's a table? Or what would be more efficient? Yeah, now with regard to pointing, and then we come to that. That's important, right? Yeah, we point at different kinds of table in order to, what? Enable our addressee to? Yes. Yes, to develop a concept, a representation, a mental representation or cognitive representation of a table. So you point at tables. You could use your hands to show what a table looks like. You could also draw a table. You could show a picture of a table. You could, well, use language and talk about. That is, you describe what a table looks like, what you do with it. And all this contributes to this process in the mind of your addressee, to this process of building up, creating a mental concept, a cognitive concept of what a table is. And you could use a synonym, provided the other person knows the synonym and has the concept available that is linked up with this synonym. Or you could use another language. A table is something like a tish. Okay? And if this other person knows what tish means, that is, has some kind of cognitive representation, some kind of cognitive concept available of tish, which represents all the information regarding what tishes, tables look like and what you can do with them, well, then it works. But usually it's not identical, and then you use a hedge and you say kind of, or something like, or similar to, or something like that. Okay? So that's the interesting point. Knowing the meaning of a word means having such a conceptual, a cognitive concept available and link it up with the word, or rather, the lexeme. Right? And learning the meaning for a lexeme means building up this conceptual structure or activating it. I could have it available already, but not linked up with this lexeme. Okay. Now look at how meanings, word meanings, are explained in a dictionary. And that is precisely how dictionary entry work. And you notice something very, very important. The dictionary entry doesn't give you the meaning. The dictionary entry helps you to build up this conceptual structure and link it up with the lexeme. That's the point. And depending on how much you already know, the dictionary entry can be very short or it has to be much longer. Explain the meaning of table to someone who is familiar with tables and chairs and desks and all these things, furniture in this Western style. That is, people who have words like table or tisch available from their native languages. And it's very easy and straightforward to explain the meaning of table, that is, to give them information that helps them build up this conceptual structure. But now do the same, or imagine you had to do the same for a person from an entirely different culture where people are just not, they don't have furniture like we do. And then you need to tell a whole story. You need to give them a lot more information, right? Okay, now here are a few examples of dictionary entries. Drogue, you probably don't know what a drogue, who knows what drogue means, what a drogue is? No? Well, when you read this dictionary entry from Chambers, you probably do. Or maybe not. It depends on how much background knowledge you have. A sea anchor, a bag-like contrivance used to steady and delay the movement of a boat. So now you know a little bit, right? You start building up this conceptual structure. You know that it has something to do, it's a kind of device that is used to delay the movement of a boat. Well, sorry, that was Concise Oxford Dictionary, and Chambers is the following one. A sea anchor used on seaplanes and flying boats. It's a conical canvas sleeve, open at both ends like a bottomless bucket. And it is used to check the way of the aircraft. So it's something like this. Open at both ends. And what happens when you throw it into the water and you hold it with a rope, or you attach the rope to your boat or to your flying boat, your seaplane? Well, there's this huge hole, water rushes in, and then this smaller hole, and the water cannot rush out at the same speed. So it slowly slows down the boat. Okay, so it's not a sea anchor which you know, these iron things, and which take a firm grip in the bed of the sea. They would rip this flying boat apart. So you need something more gentle. It's also called in German Treibanker. So people who are familiar with sailing, they probably know this. So what is important for me here is for you to understand that when you read a dictionary entry, in order to learn the meaning of a word, what you actually do is you use the information that is given there, which describes something, talks about a function and things like that. You use this information in order to build up a conceptual structure in your mind, and you link it up with the lexeme. And that is what we call in linguistics conceptual meaning, or denotational meaning, or descriptive meaning. You find all these different terms. Okay? Conceptual meaning, denotational meaning. The denotational meaning of a word is this link between a conceptual structure containing all this information and the word and the lexeme. Now have a look at the following meaning definition taken from Kobild. Needle. A needle is a small, very thin piece of polished metal which is used for sewing. It has a sharp point at one end and a hole in the other end for a thread to go through. Well, if you are not at all familiar with needles, then this doesn't help much. But if you are, then you know what needle means. You have built up a conceptual structure, a conceptual meaning, a denotational meaning for needle. But now look at this sharp point. It has a sharp point. This doesn't sound very comfortable, right? You maybe could almost feel like someone pricking you with this sharp point, with this needle. And that is not part of the conceptual meaning. These are sort of expressive, in this case, negative connotations. And they make up something like expressive meaning, which is added to the denotational meaning. What is interesting here is when you look at to needle as a verb, then you see that precisely this expressive meaning has been used to create the verb to needle someone. This is where this sharp point comes into play. Okay? But now in a metaphorical sense. If someone needles you, they annoy you continually, especially by criticizing you, and it's an informal use. Okay? So word meaning as conceptual meaning. And now let's take a closer look at the distinction between conceptual and expressive meaning. Arthur has lost his key. Compare this with Arthur has lost his spare key and Arthur has lost his blasted key. Well, compare the first two. Arthur has lost his key and Arthur has lost his spare key. Is this the same key? Same key? I think next week everybody will be sitting over there, right? Is this the same key? No, it's not. His key and his spare key. Ersatzschlüssel. Yeah? But what about Arthur has lost his key and Arthur has lost his blasted key? Same key? Yes, same key. So what does blasted do? Okay. So blasted is used to express the speaker's feelings. The speaker is annoyed about Arthur all the time losing his key. Okay. So spare, in this case, has conceptual meaning, has a denotation. It changes actually the propositional meaning of the sentence. Whereas blasted has expressive meaning, and it does not change the propositional meaning of the sentence. So if Arthur has lost his key, if this is true, then Arthur has lost his blasted key is true as well, right? So this just expresses a certain attitude of the speakers. Here we have a very interesting aspect of word meaning, which comes under the term of verb descriptivity. Look at crawl, to stare, and to nibble. Well, how would you characterize the meaning of crawl? So now you use something like a synonym. Could you give us a kind of description?
It's a kind of movement.
Right.
And it's kind of slow. It's a slow movement where you stick to the ground.
So it's a movement, and it's a special kind of movement. Okay. And what about stare? How would you characterize stare?
Look at someone very intensely.
Yeah, you look at someone. So in the first case, to crawl, you move, but in a particular way. In the case of stare, you look at someone, but in a particular way. In the case of nibble, what do? You you eat. It's not only slowly. You eat, but in a particular way, in a particular manner. Okay? And that is what is referred to by verb descriptivity. So if you crawl, you move forward on your hands and knees. If you stare, you look at something or someone for a long time with wide open eyes, in a particular manner. If you nibble something, you eat it slowly by taking small bites out of it. So we could describe or characterize the meanings of these verbs as consisting of two parts, actually. One part which is called act nucleus, that is eating, looking, and moving, and a manner part. This can create nasty translation problems. Because when you translate a text which contains such a verb, well, then you need to look for a verb in the target text which has a similar meaning. Now, this is usually not a problem with regard to the act nucleus part, but it's a problem with regard to the manner part, because that is not always precisely the same. And what you could do in this case is what? What if you have to translate a text with such a verb and you can't find a verb in the target language that has the same sort of manner features? Yes?
Use a verb that expresses the nucleus and an adverb.
Adverb, right. So you could use other means of expression that help you carry the manner part. That is, you use an adverb, or maybe an entire adverbial phrase. Yeah? So this might be necessary. Between some languages, it can be very, very difficult because they don't behave in the same way. German and English, they, in this respect, have the same, use the same means of expression. So we have these manner verbs and or verbs that of perception that have this manner feature. But in other languages like Japanese, for instance, they don't. They rather, they have a manner part, but manner is not the way of movement, the kind of movement, but the direction of the movement, coming out of, moving into, or up and down, and things like that. So you could easily find a text with, in which a steam engine comes out of a tunnel, but the actual verb doesn't tell you in which manner, whether it is fast or slow or something like that. It tells you that it comes out of the tunnel. And the rest you would need to guess from the context. And you would need this information because in English or German you would have to choose a verb which contains this manner part. Okay, so you could easily get it wrong. Okay. So far we have talked about conceptual meaning, denotational meaning. And now we want to talk about sense relations, that is, meaning relations between lexemes. Take the dictionary entry for dog, for instance. A dog is a very common four-legged animal that is often kept for guarding and hunting by people, etc. And here you have the lexeme animal. As a reader of this meaning definition, you need to know what animal means. That is, you need to have a conceptual structure available. What is the relationship between dog and animal? Can you give me other examples that have a similar relationship? Dog and animal? Cat and animal. What else? Tree and? Almost. Well, we come back to that. Tree and forest. Other examples? Furniture, table. Yes. What else? Cake and food. Yes. I understood fruit. Okay. So we have a lexeme that meaning-wise is more general, and another lexeme that is more specific. Okay? And this is what we call hyponymy. That's the relation of hyponymy. Dog is a hyponym to animal, and cat and dog are two co-hyponyms under the same superordinate. Okay? Antonymy is another type of meaning relation, another type of sense relation, that is relation, meaning relation between lexemes. You have quick and slow and big and small, old and young, above and below. And the interesting distinction here is the one between gradable and non-gradable antonyms. So in the case of married and single, it's either married or single. There's nothing in between. Yeah? Or dead and alive, for instance. But in the case of gradable antonyms like big and small, there is something in between. And if something is not big, then it's not necessarily small. Or if it's not small, it's not necessarily big. But if someone is not married, then he or she is single. But you certainly came across metaphorical uses of these lexemes, and then it's different. And you can, of course, talk about someone being half dead. Okay? Or almost married. But then you mean something different. Well, and we have synonyms, meaning relations between, sense relations between lexemes that have roughly the same denotational meaning. Roughly. It's very rare in our human languages that we have strict synonyms. In most cases, there are tiny differences, and differences regarding usage, differences regarding expressive components, and the like. So not in all contexts can you substitute broad for wide, or hide for conceal, or almost for nearly. Yeah? So more often than not, we have near synonyms. So these are sense relations that hold between lexemes on the basis of their conceptual denotational meaning. Okay, now we would like to describe in more specific ways the meaning of words. So far we have characterized the meaning of words fairly roughly. Denotational meaning as a conceptual structure. Have a look at this example we used earlier. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously, which is semantically odd. And why? Because the concepts don't fit together, right? So colorless, well, it has, you could argue, the feature minus color, colorless. But green is plus color. So colorless green doesn't fit together. Green is minus abstract, ideas is plus abstract. So green and ideas doesn't fit together. There's a mismatch. Ideas minus animate, sleep plus animate. Again, a mismatch. Sleep minus active, furiously plus active. A mismatch. We could think of the meanings, for instance, the meaning of a word that fits into this slot here as something which can be specified with the help of such features, semantic features. The X is reading a book, according to what we know about reading and who is able to read in our world. Well, this is something which has the feature plus human. Dogs can't read, trees can't read. Of course, we always have metaphorical interpretations, but that's a different matter. Okay? So this feature approach indeed helps us talk about words in sentences and how they fit into certain slots meaning-wise. This feature approach also helps us distinguish between the meaning of words, like, for instance, cow and girl and woman and boy and bin. Cow, girl, man, woman, boy, they all share the feature animate. So with regard to animate, there's no difference. But now if you add the feature human, well, then it's easy to see that girl, woman, boy, and man share the feature human, but cow is minus human. So here we have a difference between cow on the one hand and the other three on the other hand. If you add the feature male, plus or minus male, then boy and man share this feature, but girl, woman, and cow don't. And adult, this is a feature shared by woman and man, but not by the others. Okay. Now this feature approach cannot be used for an exhausting, and is not used for an exhaustive characterization of this conceptual structure, of the denotational meaning of these words, but rather is used to distinguish between meanings, similar to the distinctive features in phonetics and phonology. And this approach is actually derived from the earlier model in phonetics and phonology. In the literature, in the introductory books, there are often several problems pointed out with regard to this feature approach. And one concerns universality. Well, this is indeed a problem. This is a very simple example. But if you extend this to the rest of the language, then it's easy to see that it gets out of hand, that it's very difficult to have a principled set of features. And of course, the so-called theoretical status of male as a feature versus male as a lexeme in our natural language. Are they the same or not? And there's something linked up with this feature approach, and that is kind of difficult and maybe too difficult for you at the moment to fully understand, and it has to do with the underlying theoretical model. In the literature you also find the term meaning semantic components. So semantic features, semantic components. Now if you listen to the ring of this term component, then you can see that there is something else behind it, component, that is a part of something. And in many semantic component models, these components are actually seen as semantic, as meaning parts. Okay? So as if the meaning of a word could be split up into several parts. But the meaning of a word. But earlier we already saw that it is very problematic to conceptualize the meaning of a word as a something which could be split up into parts. But that is what is actually behind the semantic components model. The feature terminology is different. Okay, so semantic features are, in a way, descriptive features which can be used to characterize the conceptual structure that is linked up with a word. So that is perfectly in line with a cognitive understanding of this. Here is another interesting observation, and that is best explained by using the example of birds. In the dictionary, you find the following definition. A bird is a creature with feathers, 2 legs, and 2 wings, which lays eggs. Most birds can fly. So this should give us the category bird. And we have a so-called classical model of categorization which goes back to Aristotle. In this model, Aristotle distinguishes between necessary and sufficient conditions. And that is what you need, not more. A category is defined in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. According to this classical model, something is a member of a category or is not, either inside or outside the category. But what about birds? In a way, there are good birds and bad birds. A robin is certainly a good bird. An eagle would be a good bird. It's a member of the category. What about duck? Well, okay, we would say, okay, let's be generous, and a duck is a bird. But what about penguin? Those of you who know more about biology would say, okay, it's a bird. But it's not a very good bird, right? So obviously, it's not that easy. It's not really possible to define the category of bird, the category which we use for perceiving and understanding the world and for talking about the world. It is not really possible to define this category in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. Okay. And this is where prototype theory comes in. So obviously our category judgments, whether something is a member of a category or not, is not based on necessary and sufficient conditions, at least not in our everyday lives. In specialist areas where things are neatly defined, it's different. And this is where the concept of prototype comes in. The concept of a prototype, this is a quotation from Yule, helps explain the meaning of certain words like bird, not in terms of component features, that is, whether it has feathers or not, 2 wings or 2 legs and can fly or not, but in terms of resemblance to the clearest exemplar. And that is what we actually use in everyday perception. And that is what is underlying the conceptual structures that are involved in most word meanings. So prototype theory helps us cope with otherwise notorious problems. And we have almost made it. I want to draw your attention to the fact that words can have several meanings, which is quite trivial, but there are differences. So here you have bank, an example taken from COBILT. Bank as an institution where people or businesses can keep their money. Bank as a gambling game. or in a gambling game, bank is the money that belongs to the dealer or the casino management. A bank can be something like a computer data bank or a blood bank. Can be something like a store that stores data, that stores blood. Or a bank can also be the raised ground along the edge of a river or a lake. Here we make a distinction between homonymy and polysemy. Homonymy is refers to a word which has two meanings, and we would rather say in this case we don't just have one word, but we have two separate words. They only look the same, but we have two different words. They only look the same. So they are etymologically different. This is something which can only be figured out with an etymological analysis. And polysemy, in this case, we actually assume that we have one word, one lexeme, which has several meanings, which are related to each other by processes of abstraction or processes of metaphorization. So if you use the word head, not to refer to the part of our body, but to the head of a company, head of a family, head of a group, then you have a case of polysemy. And usually you find words with several meanings and that are considered as polysemous. You will find them in one entry in a dictionary, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. And homonymy, you usually find separate entries. Not here in Kobold. Okay? So in this case, 1, 4, and 5 would be polysemy, and 6, bank of a river, that would be a new word. Under the heading of word meaning, it is also important to talk about collocations and idioms. Collocations, this is where words, they go together, they are used together. If you hear one word, then you almost know what the following word will be, because you know the collocation. Okay? So if you hear the word rented, well, then the following noun is something like butter, bacon, something fatty. Rancid wouldn't go with fruit or with branches or trees or something like that. But rotten does. Yeah? Rotten butter, if someone's used this phrase, you would understand what he means, but it's not the right collocation. It would have to be rancid butter. Yeah? And rotten, well, that brings up something along the lines of vegetable, wood, eggs, and things like that. Okay? Well, and idioms like kick the bucket, hit the sack, these are phrases which are, with regard to their meaning, opaque, not transparent. So in this case, it is not possible for you to derive the meaning of hit the sack or the meaning of kick the bucket from the words and their meanings out of which this phrase was formed. You need to learn kick the bucket as an entire phrase. Okay. So this is it for today, words and their meaning. So next week we will talk about sentence meanings and utterance meanings, and that will be the crucial part where we move away from linguistic expressions when they are used in communication to incorporate also context and world knowledge and the processes that are involved. Okay, thank you very much.